Hello YouTube, this is Steve Elliott with my latest video, learning how to paint in watercolour using ArtRage. I've been a painter in watercolour for many years and I wanted to see if I could produce a realistic looking watercolour painting using ArtRage. So I set up a paper size 16 inch by 12 inch, so it's quite a reasonable size, and then I set about the process. I began by importing a photograph that I'd taken of a street scene in Stratford-upon-Avon, the birthplace of William Shakespeare, and I sketched that onto the sheet. I created that as a layer and I locked it because I have an habit of painting over layers that I shouldn't be. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't damage the drawing layer. So as soon as I'd locked it, I created another layer and I began painting. Now with cut watercolour, what I like to do is cover the whole sheet with colour. That takes away the fear of having an empty sheet of paper and not knowing where to begin. And I like to get a sort of a base colour over the whole painting. That way it also helps me get an idea of the balance of tones and where I'm going with the tones, so I don't have too light areas. If I leave an area white and I put a dark colour on it, the dark colour will probably appear darker, a darker tone than it actually is once I get the other colour on. So I get a ground colour, if you like, over the whole paper, and that's exactly what I would do if I was using actual watercolour paint. And I leave little bits of white areas, and I like to do that because I can use that later on to add highlights, natural highlights in the painting. And I'm using two brushes for the whole of the painting really. I'm using the delicate on dry watercolour brush, and I'm continually adjusting the amount of water in that brush, and also I toggle on whether it's going to be auto clean and instant dry. If I want to blend colours that I'm painting, I have the auto dry switched off, and I pretty much keep the auto clean off because I like to mix the colours on the page. Again, this is something I will be doing in an actual watercolour painting. The second brush I would use is actually a palette knife, and it's called Harsh Chaos. And when I say Harsh Chaos, I actually mean Harsh Chaos. I can't say this word. Chaos. That's it. Harsh Chaos. That's a bit of a tongue twister. Anyway, I use that brush or palette knife to soften edges again, and I like that harshness and the chaos thing going off, because that's exactly the sort of effect, or very close to an effect, you would get in watercolour if you use water to soften off edges. And I work over the whole sheet until that's covered. Once I've covered the old sheet with colour, I then create a new layer and then start adding more colour. Now this is, again, it's exactly what I would do if I was painting a real watercolour painting. I would paint from light to dark, and I'd get on some local colour, and then I would paint over that, and as the painting progresses I would gradually keep adding darker tones to eventually arriving at the finished painting. So although the tones look darker, I'm still pretty much using the same colours as I did with the first layer. Because I'm painting them over the first layer, it's sort of multiplying the effect of the colour and appearing to be darker. They are essentially the same colours as I used on the first layer, but because I'm painting over it, painting over the first set of colours, it does appear as though they are darker. And this technique, if you was doing this using watercolour, this would be called glazing. And again, I'm not concentrating on any detail on any particular area of the painting. I'm still working over the old painting, and I'll move all over the place. I'm just continually zooming in, zooming out. I find if I shrink it down to thumbnail size, it gives me an idea of how the tonal contrast and the balance is shaping up over the old painting. If I was doing that with a conventional watercolour painting, I would actually stand up and walk across the room and look at it from a distance, and I used to do that all the time. In fact, a lot of the time when I'm painting, I wouldn't dream of sitting down. I actually paint the whole thing standing up, even if I'm working at a desk, and I'll just keep continually walking away, looking at it, and then getting back in closer. And again, I just keep working on that until I've got the old painting covered. point I decide that I want to start getting in some of the really dark tones, because this painting is essentially all about light and light reflecting off objects, so I need a lot of dark areas. So I create a new area and then choose a sort of purple off grey and start painting in big blocks of colour, and this layer is on top of all of the other layers. And again, this is something I would do in watercolour. So when I've created the layer and I start applying the colour, I do change the blend mode to multiply, and that gives me more of that kind of translucent look of watercolour. I also adjust the opacity to make the grey slightly lighter. And again, if you are painting, anybody that paints using real paint, watercolour paints, they will know that a colour will appear darker when it's wet and then appear lighter. So it didn't faze me that I was putting on a colour a lot darker than I actually wanted it to be, because that's exactly how I would be working using actual watercolour. The chairs, they did give me a bit of a problem, and I worked over and over them quite a few times till I got the effect I wanted. And I actually created another new layer. I'm blending layers down all the time. Actually, I'm sort of creating new layers, painting over it so that colours don't mix together, and then blend them down. But I sort of whacked the thinners down out of the paint quite a lot, pushed the loading up, and then when I applied the colour, it looked much more like putting gouache onto the painting, which again is something I would do in watercolour. I don't like using gouache too much. I prefer the actual white of the paper to show through, because I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to watercolour. But I was quite happy in this case to use the lighter colours with much more loading of the actual colour and less thinners, to give that sort of opaque look that you would get with gouache. And I carried on working on the painting like that until I was happy with the finished result. you see me using the Harsh Chaos palette knife, there's that word again that I can't say, to blend out some of the colour in the sky. I really hope you liked this video. If you did, a like and subscribe would be really appreciated, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.